Take me to that moment, that emotional moment on the floor when you got up. What was being debated and what was said that led to that response?
What was being debated was Senate Bill 4, which was no-knock warrants. And this had been, no-knock warrants had been a big issue for both the House and the Senate since Breonna Taylor. And for me, it was a big issue because the world was looking at Kentucky. What are you guys going to do? Are you going to shake and bake? Are you going to make a difference? Are you going to fold? And I wanted this no-knock bill to pass so that while they had the light shining on Kentucky, we could leave the world in something. And so I was just sitting there listening to him talk about all the reasons why the bill should not pass.
And this was another lawmaker.
This was another lawmaker, and he was talking about why it shouldn't pass. And he even said, I'm probably going to vote for it, but I just don't feel good about the way things are going. And I was and so he started to tell us why he didn't feel good. He said things in America were good until 1962, when they took prayer out of schools. And at that point, I realized they don't understand. Life was not good for people of color, African Americans, Black, Negroes.
And you laid it all out.
Yeah. And if you don't hear anything else tonight, you're going to understand. You got to ask the question. And the one thing he did say that I agree, and I really believe that, I don't know how many times God has said it in the Bible, that the greatest of these is love. Love thy neighbor. Love never fails. It always centers around loving the humanity in another human being. And when you do that, good things can happen. And he talked about that, and I agreed with him. I said, I agree that the answer is love. And then the rest of it. In fact, I wasn't quite sure all that I had said, because someone called me and said, you stomped your feet. I said, I don't know. I got to look at it and see. I stomped my feet.
But let's go with the fact that it ended up passing, the bill, that colleague who had said that about America was good until 1962 came up to you. Yeah. Was it that same night?
It was that same night. It was before we even adjourned. And that's the beauty of it. He came up to me he says, can I give you a hug? I know we're in COVID, but I would really love to hug you. I feel like we can get these resolved, and I didn't know. So we had a good conversation.
When you said, he said, I didn't know.
I guess he didn't know the depth of the experience. Like, people conceptually might know, might think that there's racism in America, that people are treated differently. But if it's not your life, then you don't really think about it. You see it on TV, you see it on the news. And in fact, until George Floyd was killed in front of millions of people across the world, there were a lot of people that said, policemen don't do that, because when they stop me, they're very nice, they're very kind. They are making it up or over-exaggerating. Or maybe they're committing a crime and just don't want to cop to it.
So that moment, he listened.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a moment. What did that say to you? It obviously taught him something. What did it teach you in that moment?
Never give up. Like, the direct, we want everything to be a straight line from problem to resolution. And it's not that way. I have to listen, and they have to listen. And you can never give up. You have to be willing to dig in and say what's so without making the other person wrong. Like, if I try very hard not to talk about the people, the person, and talk about the issue.
And what your experience was.
Right, exactly.
So you did make headway with that, which brings me to this. So you are a freshman lawmaker, right? This
I'm
was
the
your first
president of the freshman class.
You overachiever, you.
I know. And my leader, Jenkins, will point out that I'm the only member of the freshman class.
Well, let's talk about the fact. So when you came into this, I mean, this was after a 27-year career in the Air Force, an attorney, all of the above. What made you decide that this was the next step in what you were going to do, is to run for office?
When I traveled around the world representing America, there were a lot of different things that happened that demonstrated to me that primarily people wanted their life to matter. They just want their kids to do well, and they want their voice to be heard. And when people found out, the question that military people always talk about is, where are you from? And when they asked me that question, of course, I was born and raised in Kentucky. My parents still live in the house that I was raised in. And when I would say that, they would say, either you don't look like a hillbilly, or they have blacks in Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And what I grew to learn was, as I lived in their city, they didn't have the answers. They didn't know, and they certainly didn't have the heart of the people in Kentucky. So I decided that when I get back home, I want to look and see what's needed, how my experiences working for America could work for Kentucky. So I did a lot of Leadership Louisville programs. So that I don't want to duplicate what's working. So I said, let me find out. And I did a lot of leadership programs. And I opened up a nonprofit law firm because there was a group of people, veterans, the elderly, and working families, that didn't qualify for legal aid and couldn't afford full-price legal services. So I opened up a nonprofit law firm. And I was helping a lot of people, but it was one at a time. And it wasn't changing the structure in which we live our lives. So when Darrell Owens, I ran in 2018, and when Darrell Owens decided he was going to retire, I prayed about it, I thought about it. It was 7 people in the field, and I chose to run. My family always repeats back to me stuff I've said to them over the years. I told them they were supposed to use it and forget it. And I would always say that God put you here for a reason. And you're either going to do what he tells you to do, or you're not. And when good people do nothing, evil wins. And those statements were repeated back to me. And my parents, who our house was the house in the 60s, because there was not a lot of places black folk could go. Mm-hmm. So our house was the house. And the kids would be upstairs, and my parents would be downstairs, all the adults. And my parents were the problem solvers of the community. My dad, young boys that didn't have fathers, young boys that had issues, he would always talk to them like they were somebody. Mm. And if there was, my mom said, if you got one slice of bread, just share it. So we grew up in a family where our job was to make it better than it was when we got here. And I ran, and I lost, and I thought, okay, that was good. Let me go back to my law firm. And this time, when Charles Booker decided that he was going to run for Senate, I thought that was a good thing, but I had, it didn't have anything to do with me.
So who pushed you, or who came?
Oh my gosh, I've got so many calls. And I'm like, first of all, I got calls before he announced publicly. I got calls. I said, no, I would not, for me. Some other people might do it, and it's fine for them. But I will not run against someone who's doing the job. I'll find some other way to help. And he was doing the job. And in particular, Beth Thorpe kept saying, he's going to run. What are you going to do?
meaning run for Senate
Run
and
for
vacate
Senate
that one.
and vacate it. I said, no, I haven't heard that, so I don't want to even talk about it. She said, can we at least plan? I'm like, I'm not talking about it because that's sort of rude. And then I got a call from, oh my gosh, she's going to kill me. She's in charge of Emerge.
Gretchen. Gretchen Hunt?
Not Gretchen. She's going to kill me.
Okay, another one, not Gretchen.
Right.
Okay.
She called me. She's the founder of Emerge. And she called me and I said, well, I don't know because I don't have a team. Jennifer Moore. I don't have a team. I don't have money. I don't have anything. Everything I had, I gave away. And I only have 3 days before the filing deadline. She said, you have 3 days to fill out a one-page piece of paper. And you have 4 months to come up with a plan.
Okay. So you did.
So I did.
And there you are. And let me ask you this, because you're only one of 2 black women, you and Attica. Was that on your mind at all, the representation?
Well, I think, just like my colleague didn't understand what it was like to suffer, endure some of the things that happened to blacks in America, that if you don't have, like, I don't understand what it's like to birth a cow. And one of my colleagues gave me graphic detail. He said, I just birthed a cow last night. I'm like, you did it? He's like, yeah, that's what we do. And so I have no idea what that's like. And he's teaching his son to do it. He says, it was a horse, I'm sorry. He said, so from now on, he'll be able, I'll say, son, go birth the cows. I'm like, I don't understand that, but I'm willing to listen. And I think if you want to have a world that works for everyone, then the voices have to be at the table. Mm-hmm. Because the default position for human being is, I go with what I know. And it takes something to think differently than you've been raised. It's like a fish doesn't recognize it's in water. And so I thought it was important to have representation, but I also thought it was important, like I'm the first female veteran, I'm the first female from the 43rd to lead the 43rd. And the reason why I think it's always important is because if you can't have a third, fourth, or fifth until you have a first.
Right.
And somebody has to do that, and it's hard to do that. So I was happy to make sure that people, the 67,000 people in West Louisville, had a voice. And that's what matters to me, that everybody wants their children to have the best, and why can't they? So that played into running and making sure that all the skills I learned were used to, people say to build West Louisville, yes, to build West Louisville, but it's 67,000 people. And as Louisville goes, so goes the state. You can't be short-sighted. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to make sure that the West Louisville that I grew up in was revitalized. There were Dude Ranches by Shawnee Park, Fountain Ferry, sit-down restaurants, skating rings, all types of businesses and things that are no longer there. We have 2 Krogers, 28th Street, Bank Street. 2 Krogers for 67,000 people.
And that's part of the change you want to bring.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about that first session under your belt. I'm already going, is it better than you thought, worse than you thought, about what you expected?
Well, it was like drinking from a fire hydrant because it was moving fairly quickly. And I didn't know the rules, and I don't like not knowing the rules. If I know the rules, I can play the game. But I was learning the rules. And I was like, you do this, you do this, you do this. No, don't say that. Don't. And in fact, the first week, I wanted to speak, but I didn't know what button to push.
They don't teach you that?
Well, my seatmate, I just leaned over and said, what button do I push to speak? And she pointed. Rep Mentor, she's fantastic. Her and Rep Roberts have been such mentors for me, teaching me the ropes and pitfalls. Never telling me what to do, but telling me what to look for. Mm-hmm. And so I sort of enjoy the fast pace because in the military, I'm used to being in a white man's world. I'm oftentimes the only black or the only female in the room when decisions are being made. And so I was used to it. And that first week was fascinating. It was like, wow, this is how we do it. And I was learning a lot, and I was trying to read everything. I was reading all the bills, all the pages, just like law school.
I bet.
And so it was exciting, and I was happy to be there. And then I noticed that no Democratic bills were moving. And I was unsure about why. Because you won. Because you have a supermajority. Would you take good ideals and not let them see the light of day? That was troublesome for me. And at some point we got maybe 3 or 4 bills passed. But it wasn't until the things they wanted to get done were on the table. The second thing that surprised me was we had 10 emergency bills. 10 emergency bills. And none of them had to do with giving people food, clothing, or shelter. It was mostly about stripping the governor of power. And it was irritating because people were counting on us to fix the unemployment system, to save their homes, to save their children, to give them some stability as they fight COVID and social injustice. And we were focused on who was in charge and who's going to make the rules. So that was irritating that we were not there doing the first 10 rules or laws should have been, how can we provide relief to Kentuckians? And we didn't do that. That was irritating. That was the second thing I noticed. Where are the food bills? And there were none.
So are you hoping then that's something that as you go along that you can do, that you can?
Well, as the session went along, there were some good bills that were passed. And I appreciate the really good bills, like if you want to, prohibiting peace officers from having sex with people that are arrested. You can't consent if you're arrested. Are making sure that people that are released from prison have an ID card so they can get around town, get things going, trying to make sure that they could have SNAP benefits, be eligible for Section 8 so they can get back on their feet.
Right.
As it was, they were stripped of everything. And then we act surprised that they go back to crime.
Yeah, where do you go from there?
Right. So some good bills got passed, including the TIF, including SB 4. But it took a while for those bills to emerge. And the election bill was a good bill. It's a game of inches and not yards. So the election bill wasn't everything we wanted, but it did allow for early voting. And it did allow for homeless people that have a stationary address to vote. And so that allowed some good things to happen for people. I wanted to see more good to happen to people. I asked people, our legislators, always think about, does this bill put food on the table or will it help a family thrive? Now, if the answer is no, doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but you should look at what's more important than a family thriving. Mm-hmm. And then choose based on that. Is it really that important or is it something else I can do? The third thing that didn't happen was animals. There were a lot of animal bills that didn't even see the light of day. Abuse to animals, how to treat animals. And I think every life matters in terms of the things humans do to animals. We need to have rules that you can't do that. And we didn't get any of those bills.
Let me ask you, I'm not going to tell you who wrote me this. It's going to be anonymous. But they were talking about you, and I said I was looking at people to have on panels, and they didn't realize I'd already had you on one. But they said her ability to create dialogue and relationships is beyond most. I mean, just talked about GOP leadership, really likes and respects her, even when she takes some of their membership to task. I thought this was from somebody I know just sent me describing you, who covers politics. Your thoughts after you hear that?
Well, I had learned in the military that people can't hear you when you make them wrong, when you say bad things about them. And so I always look for a common point to start the conversation. And I will allow you to prove yourself an idiot, but I don't go in that you are an idiot. So I look at people as mothers, fathers, daughters, and sons. Somebody loves them. And if we can start with that love, then we can get to the issues where we will never agree, carve them out. And the issues where we do agree, we can change Kentucky. Right now, they're all collapsed. It's all one big thing. So I go about the process of separating out so that we can focus and do good work for people. And most of them want to do good work. There's some that don't. But I love people.
Is that the pastor in you to a degree? Because I was looking at everything that you've done, pastor, lawyer, Air Force, lawmaker. I was like, oh my gosh.
Oh, well, let me tell you one story. When I was in the Middle East, it was a difficult task, but they didn't want to deny me the opportunity to try. And I was the liaison to the Kuwaiti military. And so they said, when that phone rings, you pick it up and you go get our documents and you see if it's legally sufficient and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, okay, I can do anything, except I didn't know where the building was. So the phone rang, and they said, and the gentleman on the other end said, it is ready. So I said, it's got to be the building that has the flags. And I'll just go over there and walk around like I know what I'm doing. And I did that. And this Kuwaiti military man ran up behind me and said, do you know Flip Wilson? I said, Flip Wilson? He said, and then by this time, he was like dragging me down the hallway. He threw open his door. It was like 200 Kuwaiti men in. And he says, she knows Flip Wilson.
Oh, gosh.
And they started saying, here comes the judge. Here comes the judge. And I'm like, oh, y'all like Flip Wilson. Okay, here comes the judge. But after that, I could do no wrong. They gave me what I needed. They told me about their families. They told me about their beliefs. I wasn't trying to change anybody. I was just listening. And they told me why they do the things they do. Felt very comfortable talking to me. And then my commander, he said, it was like a month later, he says, I'm going to go over with you because I want to make sure that the Kuwaitis are treating you well, because they had some trouble. And I said, sir, you don't have to do that. It's all well. He says, no, I have to. And so I try to beat him in the door and tell him, don't say, here comes the judge. Because every time I walk in the door, they go, here comes, they just break out in chorus.
Oh my gosh.
And he just, to this day, when he says, I should have known you had it under control. He said, who doesn't like you?
Is that still the case?
Well, I go out of my way to find common ground, to listen to what matters to people. And I stand on, this world can work for all people. Don't ask me how. But if I don't stand there, where do I stand? And when I'm talking to you, I'm going to ask you about your family. I'm going to learn about you, what matters to you. And we'll start from there. Sometimes it works, sometimes, and I'm authentically interested. And I've just learned to be interested in what matters to people.
Well, it gives them value.
Yeah.
They feel valued. And if people feel valued, that's a game changer. So who was your mentor? Was there somebody, was it your parents? Was it someone else, a mentor who Or was that just innate in you?
I would say it started with my mom and dad had me when they were very young. And they took good care of us. And then my mom had 14 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
So we were like a big family. Like when I went off to college, they each wanted to take me shopping to get long johns because they wanted to make sure I wasn't cold walking across campus. And I'd have to tell them, I have a pair of long johns. Or my uncle, Reverend Thomas French, who was the second minister of Oak Grove Missionary Baptist, he took me shopping for luggage. He says, you can't take bags to college. You have to have a piece. So it was my first piece of luggage. So it's the village concept that we will rise together and we will fall together. And I have 3 brothers and sisters, and we were very close. We still are. They're still here in Louisville, Kentucky. And it's basically my parents instilled in us, Dorothy and Kenneth Stevenson, that your job is to make a difference. Your job is to make it better than it was. Your job is to help people. Do that.
Best piece of advice you've ever gotten?
I would have to revert back to two. One, love never fails, even when it looks like it is. And then secondly, be you. Like I've been told you smile too much. I've been told you're too friendly. I actually was told you will never make it in this man's Air Force because you smile too much. And I didn't get the mentoring that other people got in the Air Force. My husband, who we've been married 39 years, and part of his wedding vows to me was, I will support you and make sure that your dreams come true. And he's done that.
Wow.
Whatever it takes, he does.
So he lets you, like, do you.
Do me.
Like you said, do
yeah,
you.
Yeah. And sometimes he'll have his opinion about it and we'll talk about it. And in the end, he'll say, is this consistent with who you said you want to be in the world? And if I say yes, he says, okay. How many of these signs do we have to put up?
Last question. You're going to be on our leadership panel, LeadHERship panel. I want to make sure we say that. What do you think makes a good leader?
When I was little and my mom and dad didn't have money, they were broke. We lived in the projects, we lived in the projects across the street from Simmons College. But my mom thought it was important to get me books in the mail. And every month I get a book in the mail, Dr. Seuss. And to this day, Green Eggs and Hams is one of my favorites. And so we read all the time. And it opened up whole new worlds. And I can understand people a little better because I had a wide vision of what the world was like. So reading is number one. And the other thing is find a way to love people. And finally be you. I've tried to be other people.
I don't know why you would, but okay.
And it was horrible. I wasn't even a good fake. But I thought, well, let me try it because that person is successful. And it didn't work. So those are the 3 pieces of advice that I've gotten along the way. And my children, I have 2, Tamay and Thomas. My children are such good human beings. And my husband and I, we looked at each other and we said, we want to raise global citizens. How do you do that? And we didn't know. So we asked questions. And we kept asking questions. And we had a trusted circle that we could go to. So there's a lot you can do, but the most important thing is you can never give up. Things haven't always gone my way. There have been some mean people. I call them mean. There's some people will probably call them something else. But my husband is good at, he'll listen to me, and then he'll say, okay, now what? Are you ready to brush yourself off? Who do you need to talk to give them their problem back? And I trust him, so if he says go left, I'll go left. Even when I don't want to. So that's what people have taught me. But I go back to, you got to love people and listen. If I'm talking, that means I'm not listening. And when it was time for me to leave the Middle East, one of the military men asked my commander, could I go with him to his mother's home, because she'd never met an American. Mm-hmm. And I got permission to go, and we drove for miles and miles and miles, and it was sand everywhere. And I was thinking, okay, was this a good idea? But then over the horizon, you could see a shack. It was a shack by American standards. And when you walked in the door, everything you could see from the door. And in the middle of the room was her kitchen table, and she had 2 teacups. And the one teacup, and we sat there for an hour drinking tea, because she spoke no English. And at the end, he said, my mama has a present for you. And she said, thank you, because she'd learned to say thank you in English.
Oh, wow.
And at that point, I quickly realized I never knew this guy would want me to meet his mom, but I treated him well. I treated him like he had value. And you never know who's watching, what the kids are looking at, and you have to be the best version of you. And when you're not, because sometimes I have not been, I have to go fix it. I go apologize. I go clean it up until that person is satisfied. And always live for something bigger than self. So if I'm having a pity party because something bad happened to me, I have to look and see, is it because the world has collapsed, or am I indulging myself? And there's nothing wrong with self-indulgence. You got to do it. Have some cake in the bed every now and again. But then you have to pick up the mantle and say, I said this world would work for everyone. I can't stop.
Back to work.
Back to work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.